Okay, that's the right one now. I'll have to update that in the Moodle as well. Is everyone seeing the presentation? It says, say, Chapter 8, Stage 2, Data Collection Design Experiments.
No, not yet.
Okay.
No, we don't see it, Professor.
Okay. No, I had the wrong slide in there. I just had to change it real quickly. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, I'll have to update that in Moodle too. I didn't realize when I uploaded it, I still had the first slide for Chapter 7 on there, so I don't want to confuse anyone. All right, well, so for Chapter 8, you're looking at data collection design for experiments, and this is where they start to get into a lot of the statistics in research. So you'll look at some of the statistics that you've studied, probably in previous courses or that you use in your current careers. So some of the concepts of statistics. Okay. Okay, so remember there's no week 8 discussion assignment. So if you're looking for it, it's not there. We don't have one for week 8, and there's no Chapter 8 writing assignment. I haven't decided yet if we're going to do that for Chapter 9 because I just want to make sure that I have all of your papers graded and that you're getting, feedback before you have other assignments, and also definitely before you have that proctored exam. So I haven't decided yet. We'll see. We might have a discussion and no writing assignment for Chapter 9, but we'll see. Also, make sure you read the assignment instructions. So I've noticed that some of you're putting in a lot of work on your paper, but you're not responding to any of the assignment requirements. So, for instance, if there were some questions that you needed to include in your paper, they're not there. So just be careful about that. So if you're using some of the generative AIs to help you write your papers, remember to go back to the assignment instructions, and you can type that into your generative AI if that's what you're using to do that, so that it knows to include those specifics for your paper. Yeah. Okay, and then also for your reference list entries, they should also be in text citations. So let's go to something that will help us a little more to understand that. So let me a little change what we're sharing here. And okay, so this are you seeing this PDF here, students? It says in-text citation checklist. Okay, so I'm going to scroll all the way down here, and it says for all reference list entries, all works in the reference list cited, are all works in the reference list cited in the text. For any uncited works, either cite them in the text or remove the entries from the reference list. So they go hand in hand. So if it's in your reference list, it should be cited in your paper. That's what they mean by in the text. It's in your paper. So if you have it listed on your reference page, you should have had an in-text citation somewhere in your paper as well. And so and then we'll go to what some of those look like. And so you're most of you are doing very well on formatting these. When you do use them, you use them very well. It's just now we need to remember to if you have it in your reference list, that means that somewhere in your paper you've made some kind of connection to that reference. So you need to cite that in your paper. So just remember that. It's that's just something that we need to do. Okay, and if you have any questions, please just reach out to me, and and I can help you with that. So let's go back to our presentation here. Okay, any questions on that? One of the reasons I brought up reading the assignment instructions besides just to make sure that you're included everything in your paper is also word count. So if you have a writing assignment, I usually add what the requirement word count is going to be usually somewhere between 600 and 800 words. And that includes your title page and reference list as well. So so you don't have to worry about having 600 words in the actual text. This is as long as everything, all of your pages, including your title page, your text, or your main body of your paper, and your reference list, all total a minimum of 600 words, then you've met the requirement. The reason I'm being a little picky about this now is because, for one, it's not fair to your classmates who are turning in 700, 800 word papers, and they're fully developed, but also I think that you're cheating yourselves on the ability to really expand your thoughts and to really get those explanations into your papers as well as you can, so that you're showing me that you really understand the concepts, and that you're able to explain those back to me as you're reading them and learning them in the lectures and in the textbook. So that's why I want you to be very careful not to shortchange yourself, if you will, on those word count. If you can get to that 600 words, I think you're going to see that your paper, you'll feel better about how you develop your thoughts in your paper. Okay, so any questions on that? Okay. All right, so here's our first video.
Grad Labs.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Grad Labs. Today, I'd like to talk about a specific part of the scientific process, data collection. An experiment should always answer a specific question. The purpose of an experiment is to either help us understand something that we don't know, or to help us question someone else's results. Data gives us the information that we need in order to do this. The hard part is deciding what data needs to be collected in order to make our hypothesis testable and help us answer our question. In this video, I'm reacting sodium with water. I did this twice, once with room temperature water and once with boiling water. I can decide to just ask a broad question like, what differences in my results will I see? What observations can I make that differ between the two trials? But the information that comes back from that is not very specific. There are no numbers involved. It's just broad observations that I'm able to make as I watch the video or watch the experiment unfold. The most helpful information that can help us to answer the most specific questions is going to involve taking measurements. So I need to decide, what can I measure during this experiment? Well, one thing that I can measure is the amount of time that it takes each reaction to occur from beginning to end. I can tell you that with room temperature water, it took well over 3 minutes for the sodium to fully react with water. That's right, I watched this little thing fizzle around in a circle slowly for 3 full minutes. With the boiling water, it reacted fully in under 40 seconds. Let's go through another example from beginning to end this time. Here I have another twist on the classic baking soda and vinegar. On the left, I have room temperature vinegar, and on the right, I have chilled. The broad question that I'd like to answer is, what differences in results will I see if I add baking soda to varying temperatures of vinegar? It's a good question, but it's not very specific. What I need to do is to find something measurable that will help me to answer a more specific question. In the last segment, I suggested measuring the amount of time it takes a reaction to occur from beginning to end. That worked great for sodium and water, but anyone who's worked with baking soda and vinegar knows that even once the reaction is mostly over, it tends to fizzle for quite a while. So the question is, where do we draw the line? At what point do we say the reaction is completely over? We don't necessarily have to answer that question. Instead, we can pick an easier point to measure. For example, what I have here is 2 beakers. They're clearly labeled the same from 0 milliliters all the way up to 300. That's a volume measurement, and volume, of course, is the measurement of the amount of space that matter takes up. So instead of saying, let's measure the amount of time it takes for the baking soda and vinegar to completely react, I could say, let's measure the amount of time that it takes the baking soda and vinegar to reach a certain point in this beaker, and maybe even fall to a certain point. For example, we could measure how long it takes each to reach 250 milliliters. Then we can take a second measurement to see how long it takes that baking soda and vinegar to fall to 125 milliliters. What did you observe? Pause here to record our data in your data table. We should be able to fill out all of trial 1. It took 2 seconds for our room temperature baking soda and vinegar to bubble up and reach the 250 milliliter level, but it took the chilled baking soda and vinegar 4 seconds to reach the same spot. 22 seconds into our experiment, our room temperature fell to the 125 milliliter level, but it took until 35 seconds into our experiment for the chilled baking soda and vinegar to do the same. So now we need to think about what this data means. Because we took 4 pieces of data from one single trial, there's a lot that we can learn from this experiment. For example, I can see that it took twice as long for our chilled baking soda and vinegar to reach that 250 milliliter mark as it did our room temperature baking soda and vinegar. I can also see that while it took 35 seconds for our chilled baking soda and vinegar to bubble all the way up and then come all the way down to that 125 milliliter mark, it took only 22 seconds for the room temperature baking soda and vinegar to do the same thing. There's one other helpful thing I think we can take from this data. We can see how much time it took for our baking soda and vinegar to go from its peak point of 250 milliliters all the way back down to 125 milliliters. Our room temperature baking soda and vinegar took 20 seconds to do this. And we can find that out, of course, by taking our end time and subtracting our start time to get 20 seconds. While our chilled baking soda and vinegar took quite a bit longer, it did it in 31 seconds. So while we don't have the amount of time it took the reaction to completely take place from beginning to end, we have a good idea of that number by looking at a start and stop point that we picked for convenience of measurement.
Okay. All right. So what do you think about that video? What do you think about that? 1 second. Oh, go ahead. Yes. Mr. Muhammad, this thing. Oh, we can't hear you.
Yes, I think any experiment, even as we study in science, also it's the same procedure. We have at first place what is the question that will be answered by this experiment, and what is the experiment and its tools we will use during this experiment, and what is the steps of the experiment, and also what is the measures we will count in our observation. Then take the observation about the experiment, and if it's comparative as this video in room temperature and in chilled water. And final thing, we have to put our conclusion about the experiment, final conclusion. I think this is the steps also inside the lab and inside, as we studied even in science subjects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. So a key word that you used there was to measure. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Well, anyone else? What do you think about the video? In thinking about the way the video explained data collection design for experiments and what we studied about observation, what are some of the things that you've noticed? Some of the differences, some of the similarities. Mr. Hussain just talked about some of the similarities, but and also some of the differences. So what are some of the differences between the two types of data collection? Yes, Elena.
Hello, everyone. I consider that's the difference because when you have already arranged the experiment, you already assume some factors, for instance, the temperature. So we already have these dimensions and we already tested according to that because we had already some information beforehand and we already tested it. It's in my opinion.
Yes, very good. Yes. Yes. Okay. So well, I'll let you continue to think about that. We'll go on to the next slide. So experiments and causation. So so he actually talked about that. He didn't use the phrase causation, but that was one of the things that he was observing by the reaction to the sodium in the vinegar. So why do events occur under some conditions and not under others? So experiments are research studies carefully designed and conducted to explain why something happens in some instances and or under some conditions, but not in others. So in experiments, the researcher proposes a causal hypothesis, a speculation that one variable causes a change to another variable. And so in that experiment, you had your two variables. And then the researcher then manipulates the independent variable and observes whether the dependent variable is affected by the hypothesized. Okay, so does that make sense to everyone? Anyone have any questions about that? Anyone want to care to give us an example of what they're talking about there? But what would have been the independent variable and the dependent variable in the experiment that we watched in that video? Okay, I'll give you a hint here. So, okay, so the researcher then manipulates the independent variable. So this is something that, you know, you can control, and then observes whether the dependent variable is affected as hypothesized.
So, Professor, I think I was watching that video, but I'm sorry, I think I wasn't really focusing totally, as I have an injured bunny in my house. Yesterday, my dog, yeah. So I think when it comes to, in general, when it comes to independent variable and dependent variable, I think these are the key components in the research design and really help define any relationship between the factors we are basically trying to study in that experiment. And when it comes, I mean, basically, you know, the independent variable is trying to really manipulate and control the experiment. And it's believed that it can really, change and assign different levels or conditions. Um, and when it comes to dependent variable, I think it's basically the main factor on which the experiment is basically totally dependent on, and really which really affects the outcome of the experiment.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so all right. So then causation evidence. The essential evidence of causation is that A produces B or A forces B to occur. Okay, so thus there is at least one independent variable and one dependent variable in a causal relationship. So it has to be one of each, at least one of each, and in some cases there can be several, but it has to be at least the minimum has to be one of each. So empirically, we can never demonstrate with any certainty an A-B causality. So causation needs evidence to support an inductive conclusion. We cannot demonstrate a causal relationship deductively. As such, in a causal study, we estimate the probability that A produces B based on what we observe and measure. So why do you think that is? Why isn't it that we can't deduce it? We can only, you know, infer, or it can be an inductive conclusion, but it can't be concluded deductively. In other words, it's not definitive. It's not you know, something that is going to be 100% of that result every single time. But you can estimate the probability. So this is where we get into you know, some of the averages, and then we just conclude that based on these averages, this is more likely to occur than these outliers where it doesn't occur or it exceeds the expectation. Any questions about that? Anyone want to talk a little more about this? And we'll talk a little bit more about dependent variables and independent variables later on in this lesson and also in subsequent lessons and chapters. But so this is where we start to get really into the actual you know, your data you're reporting back when you're doing your research studies, especially in experiment based research. So okay, so in testing a causal hypothesis, we seek three types of evidence. Okay, covariation between A and B. So in other words, do we find A and B occur together in the way hypothesized? When A does not occur, is there also an absence of B? When there is more or less of A, does one also find more or less of B? So there's a direct correlation between the two variables. And then time order of events moving in a hypothesized direction. So does A occur before B? So they kind of demonstrated that right in that video. So that and then no other causes of B, and that can be a really difficult one. So can one determine that C, D, and E do not covary with B in a way that suggests possible causal connections? Okay, and in addition to these three conditions, successful inference making and causal designs must meet two other requirements. All factors, with the exception of the independent variable, must be held constant and not confounded with another variable that is not part of the study control. Each case study must have an equal chance for exposure to each level of the independent variable in the study, random assignment of cases or participants or to groups. So, and we talked a little bit about that in previous sections. So, any questions about this? You know, it's a lot. You know, I get that. So we'll spend some time on that concept. So let's see what else we have here. Okay, so types of asymmetrical causal relationships. So relationship type, stimulus response, nature of relationship, and examples. So a stimulus response, an event or change results in a response from some object. Okay, so something is acted upon and it causes a response. And an example is a change in work rules leads to a higher level of work output. So now we're getting into something that's relevant to what this course focuses on, right? Research and development management. And so a change in government economic policy restricts corporate financial decisions. A price increase results in fewer unit sales. So again, so here's a stimulus and the response. The event or change results in a response from some object. And these are three examples that they gave here. Okay, we'll come back to that. I'll ask you some questions about that in a second. Property disposition. So an existing property causes a disposition. Okay, age and attitudes about saving, gender and attitudes towards social issues, social class and opinions about taxation. Okay. And then disposition and behavior. A disposition causes a specific behavior. Opinions about a brand and its purchase, job satisfaction and work output, moral values and tax cheating, Okay, and then property behavior. Property and behavior. An existing property causes a specific behavior, stage of the family life cycle, and purchases of furniture, social class and family savings patterns, age and sports participation. So, okay, so let's look at this first one here. Any event or change results in response from some object. So, and here are the three examples that they gave. A change in work rules leads to a higher level of work output. So, what could be an example of something like that? What could change in work rules that might lead to a higher level of worker output? I'm going to give you an example of one that I used just this morning on the class, and that was when I was talking about you need to read the instructions for the assignment, and I talked about word count. So let's assume that some of you weren't aware that you had to reach a specific word count. By changing that rule, my expectation is that it's going to lead to a higher level of your output, your work output, and your the content that you're giving me and you're writing an assignment. So it'll lead to a higher level. So more, I think that the content would improve as you give yourself more room to develop your ideas. So, and again, I also talked about how you need to make sure that what you're listed in your reference list is also cited. So I know that the whole concept of in-text citation was, kind of a little confounding, a little confusing. So by saying if you list it in your reference list, then you need to look in your main paper and see, how did I use that? How am I referring back to that source that I have in my reference list? And then you add an in-text citation simply by just putting the author's name and the date of the publication at the end of a sentence that you think might be relevant to that content. So there, and again, that is going to increase your output, and it'll also result in better grade for you and your paper. So that's an example that I can think of. Are there any other examples that you might be able to think of that would demonstrate the stimulus and response? Okay, I'll let you think about that for a second. And let's talk about this property and disposition. An existing property causes a disposition, age, and attitudes about saving. So the property there, so age, gender, and social class are defined as properties. Sometimes these terms can be a little nebulous, right? Property, what are they talking about? So in this case, age is the property, and then the disposition is the attitude about saving. So here an example would be when I was very young. I looked at life as eternity kind of thing. I never thought about getting old. It just seemed, I was 20, getting to 30 seemed like forever. 10 years was like, who can even imagine that? I'll be old at 30. And then, again, at 30, you're thinking 50, 20 years from now, that's, but, and that attitude causes us to be maybe a little more complacent about saving for the future, because the future seems so far away. And that's what they're saying that. So So there's a direct correlation between how we think about saving for the future based on the age that we are. And then gender and attitudes towards social issues. So I think here maybe they're saying that certain social issues are going to affect us differently based on our gender or gender identities. So oh, anyone what's a good example of that? What are some of the social issues that men and women might view differently? And again, I just want to make sure that you understand how they're using these to define in this relationship type.
So,
Holiday.
Yes.
So I think it depends on the culture itself. So some cultural backgrounds may change the what gender is responsibilities, for example. So in eastern side of the world, the male the male person or the family member, the male family member will have more responsibilities in terms of finance. So the male family member will have more financial responsibilities towards the family than the female member. And Western side of the world, maybe this will change, and it will be more cooperative financial responsibilities more than sole financial responsibilities.
Okay, so that's a very good example. So we're talking more of the patriarchal societies, versus non-patriarchal kind of society. And your example was maybe East versus West cultures. So that's a good argument. We know that even in the United States, still there is this unconscious bias when it comes to the incomes that women are earning versus what men are earning, even in the U.S. For example, I live here in Utah, in the state of Utah, in the U.S., and it's actually where the that gap, that wage gap, is, I think, the largest in the nation. So there's a huge patriarchal a kind of mindset here in the state of Utah, where when women go into the workforce, the assumption is that they don't need to make as much, because based on the same example that you just gave, Mr. Yusuf, is that they assume that the male is the quote unquote breadwinner of the family, and so that this it's just a really, it's an unconscious thing that happens, and they automatically will give them a higher salary, although they have the same skill set, the same education. This thing that happens here. Yes.
Professor,
Yes,
I
so
think I want to give one example of my previous project where we were trying to really work on the retirement plans. And we were like trying to calculate, how many women is actually interested. I mean, that is somehow true that women really, not most, but sometimes, even today in modern world, not really looking for the financial independence, and they are not securing money for their future. So I think when we were like really doing this analysis of knowing that how many women still don't have that much into their 401k, and they're not saving for their retirement. So I think we got to know, yes, it's still a good amount of women still not trying to become financial independent. So agree with the cultural differences that sometimes is the culture and the mindset that only men needs to be saving for the retirement and and become financial independence as compared to women. But I think somewhere it's changing and really moving fast, that we all are like, I'm already very conscious about my retirement, that when I retire I should have my financial independence and money. So yeah, really go towards that.
Absolutely. So very good. So yeah. So those are great examples. So good. So then we understand this whole property indisposition, and existing property causes a disposition. So good, very good. I just wanted to make sure that we have some really good examples there, so it helps to define these terms. So this disposition and behavior. A disposition causes a specific behavior. So opinions about a brand and its purchase, job satisfaction and work output, moral values and tax cheating. I thought that was interesting. So opinions about a brand and its purchase. Okay, so yeah, job satisfaction and work output. That's a big one, right? They always have these job satisfaction surveys. I know they do them all of the time. I still work as an engineer. And, I consult in I'm not part of the organization, so I'm not really included in their job satisfaction surveys. But sometimes they'll talk about these in the team meetings that we have, and I just think it's interesting that a lot of times I observe that uh, the employees really don't want to say anything negative about their managers because they know that it'll impact them. So those job satisfaction surveys are really kind of skewed in a way that it's kind of sad, really, because they think that they're getting usable data, but they're not, because the employees oftentimes feel intimidated and they're not going to be that candid in their responses. Because trust me, when a category is very low on that scale, that Likert scale of 1 to 5, then they really belabor those those points, and to the point to where the employee is very hesitant to score that particular category low in the future, although they might have the same feeling. So it's interesting how the psychology that goes into um, organizations based on these things. So anyway, I didn't mean to get off track there, but I just thought that's an interesting one there: disposition and behavior. Job satisfaction and work output. So the real indicator is how the work is getting completed. That's really the true indicator. It's not going to be what they respond on those surveys. It's going to be the amount of work that they're completing and it's a better indicator of how they feel about their job, or how well they feel they can do their job, or how well they've been trained, um, or how well they're able to get feedback from their managers. It's based on their actual productivity. So property behavior, an existing property causes a specific behavior. Yes.
So Professor, one question about the disposition behavior.
Yes.
Because the third point there is moral values and tax cheating. So I mean, if I am an employee and I'm paying my taxes, I mean, it's not, I don't have an option other than paying all my taxes, right? I mean, I don't have a way to cheat taxes anyway. I think this point is basically for the entrepreneurs, the small business entrepreneurs or big business entrepreneurs, that they can show all their income in a different way and they don't have to really pay taxes. So I think this, when it comes to moral values and tax cheating, it's not really applied to the employees in any organization, because we tend to really pay taxes as per the rule set, and from our salary is being deducted. So that doesn't really come towards that that we are able to do any kind of disposition behavior when it comes to taxes.
Yeah. So I understand what you're saying, because it's a fixed a thing. They take a fixed amount out of your paycheck based on how you've indicated your W-2 form. So I think that's what you're saying. Is that correct, Samia?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say, that, there is no way being an employee, we can filling that W-2 and really, even if you say something different in W-2, they're going to catch it when you are finally paying your taxes towards the end of the year. So I think what I'm trying to say, that when it comes to this third point, disposition behavior, and third point there in moral values and tax teaching, it's not really going towards the employees, because it's not, we can probably never be able to do any kind of tax cheating, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's going to happen more, not only with just entrepreneurs and small business owners, but also with freelancers. So I freelance doing certain things where people pay me and they don't deduct the taxes. So I have to keep track of that, and I have a tax preparer, an accountant who actually does my taxes for me, because it's a lot to keep track of. I can't have dozens of different clients where I'm doing certain work, like building curriculum, doing instructional design, or e-learning development, or creating workbooks based on someone's self-help book or something like that. And it's all on me, because they don't deduct any taxes out of the payments. So, and then in that situation, yeah, it depends. It's my integrity. It's online. So
Sure.
thank you, Mr. Joseph. You had something also you wanted to say?
Yeah. So it was like in the original question about the job satisfaction and the changes in work input. This was
Yes.
long, but again, if we go back to the original question about job satisfaction and workers' inputs and outputs, I think it's very important that to understand that job security, for example, is a very important factor, which increases the workers' outputs or productivity. Also, work environment itself, and some companies will measure that with indicator using some surveys to understand if their employees are happy with the management team or with the work environment. Also, one of the inputs might be the work flexibility or shift hours. Is it long hours or it's like part-time hours? Some families will need, let's say, a daycare for their kids. If they have young kids, they cannot work night shift, for example. They need to work a day shift. And if the job requires a night shift, they may quit. So many factors can contribute in the workers' outputs. And also about tax cheating, you mentioned some professionals use accountants or financial advisors where they legally can reduce the amount of tax they pay using some tax reductions approved by the company, for example, or allowed by the company, like cheating in their tax filing. Thank you so
much. Yes, very, very good. Thank you. Yeah, and your comments made me think about of here versus stimulus and response. Or a change in work rules leads to a higher level of worker output. So those people with those long hours or different shifts, where they are rotated into a different shift. Maybe their output is also affected. So very good. So property and behavior. An existing property causes a specific behavior. So stage of the family life cycle and purchases of furniture. That one kind of, I wasn't so sure about that one. And it says social class and family savings patterns. That I think I understand that one. And age and sports participation. So we see professional athletes retiring, all the time. They get to a certain point in their careers, and they feel like they can they are no longer able to participate. Interesting thing that happened in the last few Olympics is that they've had athletes competing in sports like swimming and gymnastics and other physically demanding sports at ages much more advanced than people previously thought, and they were medaling in those events. In fact, one medaled in swimming and broke the American record at the age of 42, competing against other swimmers who were literally half their age. So that's so that is interesting. But it eventually it does take its toll. So that's a good one. But so there are all those outliers, though, right? Every time. So social class and family savings patterns. So this is something that I've observed firsthand, where there's a tendency, if you watch certain families, again, this is just on average. It's not, everyone doesn't fall into this category, but if you watch a pattern of poverty, you'll notice that there's certain habits that are perpetuated from one generation to the next, and so it takes some education to break that pattern and to re-educate individuals so that they're not in this perpetual cycle of poverty. They learn to save. They learn to live within their means, which means not right on the borderline, but living on less than your income. So so they learn now that they don't want to exceed their income, so that they're finding themselves in debt and always behind, but to live on less than what they make, and so then they'll have that room for saving. So it's a very difficult thing if you've grown up and there's one or two generations before you who've had the mindset that you just spend everything, and don't worry about tomorrow. So very, very good. So let's see if we can get to another section here before we have to break. Okay, so conducting an experiment. In a well-executed experiment, researchers must complete a series of activities to carry out their craft successfully. Okay, so although the experiment is the premier scientific methodology for establishing causation, the researcher needs to be both resourceful and creative to make the experiment live up to its potential. The researcher must accomplish the following to make the endeavor successful. Okay, and it's also shown in Exhibit 8.4, and we'll come to that in a second. But select relevant variables. Well, that's important, right? It has to. They have to be relevant. Specify the treatment levels. Okay. Control the experimental environment. That's very important. Choose the experimental design. We've talked about that. Select and assign the participants. Again, that's important. Pilot test data collection protocols and revise. So that's something we haven't talked about yet. actually do kind of a pre-test thing. So you know you're sure that when you execute the actual experiment that it's going to yield some kind of results, some usable results. It'll work, in other words, and then conduct the experiment. Okay, so let's go ahead. All right, so here, and it was we'll come back to this maybe after the break if we need to, but here is our little diagram, and it's showing experiments in the research process. So design the research, so data collection design, and this is relevant to experiments. Select, we just talked about that. Select the relevant variables, specify levels of treatment, control the environment, choose experimental design. Then over here, sampling strategy, select participants, assign participants to treatment levels. Then over here, pilot testing and revision. And I can save money and time, right, to do that. And then you conduct the experiment. Okay, so any questions about that before we break? And we can come back to it if you need to after the break. But so let me go back to the previous slide there. Okay. Again, the researcher must accomplish the following to make the endeavor successful. So that's up there. This is the kind of stuff that you'll probably see later on the exam. So that's important to get that. Okay. And then there again is the table that we use. Okay, so we do have a video where I'm going to go back to that video after the break. It's still slightly before 10 o'clock Eastern, but we'll come back at 10:10. Okay, 10 minutes after, and pick up where we left off. I'll go back to the video that I skipped over because we had a lot of participation today, which is really good. I don't want to force the content, have to get through all the slides. It's not that important to me. It's more important that we have meaningful discussions that we did. So I'll see you 10 minutes after the hour. Okay. Okay. Welcome back. We're getting back from break. And you're still able to see the presentation. Is that correct? It says 10-minute break in there.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, I also wanted to, because I missed a couple of comments here. Okay. Someone wanted me to clarify the writing assignment for Chapter 7 before the end of the class today. So I will go back to that for sure, Winnie. Thank you for bringing that up. And then Samia gave us a good example here. Says, for example, suppose a researcher is studying the effect of a new medication on reducing pain. In this case, the independent variable would be the administration of the medication with the different levels of conditions, such as different doses or placebo. The dependent variable would be the pain level experienced by the participants, which would be measured or assessed using standardized pain scales. So very good. And then Muhammad Hussein said C and D, another two independent variables. So, okay. Yeah. Okay, very good. Okay, so welcome back, and let's go back to our video here, and let's see what this is all about here. So they can get it to work right. It doesn't want to. Oh, here we go. There we go.
How do medical researchers determine if medical interventions really work? In this lesson, you will learn how to establish causation by using a well-designed experiment. Let's review. A while back, you learned about random assignment. When individuals are randomly assigned to treatments, it means that each of the individuals in the study has an equal chance of being selected for treatment. Randomization is important because it helps us isolate the effects of a single variable. One way to randomly assign individuals is to put all of their names into a hat, mix them up well, and pick out a predetermined number of names. Another important thing to review before we begin this lesson is that a correlation between two variables does not mean that a change in one of the variables causes a change in the other. It only means that there is a linear association between the two variables. This is a very important distinction in statistics. So how do researchers establish causation then? For example, if we see that there is a negative correlation between meditation and blood pressure, what do we need to do in order to figure out if more meditation is causing lower blood pressure? The answer is that we will need to conduct an experiment. In all of the previous examples I have referred to in the correlation lessons, the data has been from observational studies. In an observational study, individuals are observed after the fact. They are not assigned to different treatment categories like meditation or no meditation. Experiments are different. In an experiment, individuals are randomly assigned to treatment groups. Because each individual in a random assignment has an equal chance of being selected, many sources of variability are eliminated in a well-designed experiment. Suppose a drug company's researcher would like to test the effectiveness of a new drug. From the pool of individuals participating in the study, the researcher would first develop a method of randomly assigning each individual to a treatment group. One way of doing this would be to put all 56 names in a big hat, mixing it up, and then selecting the names of 28 individuals for the treatment group. The other 28 individuals will serve as the control group. The next step in the experiment is to administer the treatment and the placebo. The treatment group gets the real pill, and the placebo group gets a pill that looks like the medicine being tested but does not actually contain any medication at all. The word placebo can be used in other types of experiments too. It just means a treatment that mimics the variable under study but doesn't contain the active ingredient. For example, if the treatment under study were meditation, the placebo might be quiet time. After the treatments are administered, the researcher compares the results of the two groups. Suppose that of the 28 people who took the medication, 18 felt better. On the other hand, only 11 of the 28 who took the placebo felt better. Does this mean that the medication is effective? Answering this question requires a bit of statistical knowledge that's beyond the scope of this lesson, but I'll give you a little preview. We see that a larger proportion of people felt better with the drug, but we want to know if the difference is statistically significant. To do this, we use our graphing calculator to perform a statistical test. We locate the statistics menu on the graphing calculator and navigate to Stat Tests. Because we are comparing two proportions and all the conditions for using this test have been satisfied, I will select a two-proportion z-test. I fill in the template with 18 out of 28 successes for the treatment group and 11 out of 28 successes for the placebo group. In the bottom cell, I've indicated that I'm interested in whether the first proportion is significantly larger than the second. When I hit OK, I get all the results of the two-proportion z-test. The value I'm interested in right now, though, is the p-value. This is the probability that a result as extreme as what my experiment came up with could have happened just by chance. So the p-value is about 3%. This means that the probability that results like these could have happened by chance alone, if the medicine were no better than a placebo, is about 3%. This is a pretty small percentage, but if doctors are going to prescribe this medication to their patients and expect them to pay lots of money for it, they want to see p-values much lower than this. They want to know that there's almost zero probability that the results were due to chance rather than the effectiveness of the drug. The last step in the process is to draw conclusions from the test. The initial question was, does the medicine work? With the results discussed here, we would say that the medicine does not appear to be effective. In this lesson, you have learned how to establish causation by using a well-designed experiment.
Okay. Okay, any comments on that? I think that went back to the example that Samuel gave us in the chat. So be sure to go back and read that. So yeah, so what do you think about that? The whole causation example in that video. Okay, so I'll give you a chance to think about that. We'll just okay. So all right, so we're gonna do a poll because I love to do these polls, and so it's gonna go ahead and okay. So that here we are. Okay, so here's our poll. Which of the following is a type of evidence that researchers seek in testing a causal hypothesis? Okay, I'm going to go back into the presentation here to give some hints. Go back here. In testing a causal hypothesis, we seek 3 types of evidence, okay? All right. Let's go back to the poll question. And anyone else want to give it a try? Okay, so yes, so the answer is D, all of the above. And again, going back to the slide. Right there. We talked about covariation between A and B, time order of events, movement into the hypothesized direction, and then no other possible causes of B. So that indicate that all 3 of these are evidences that the researcher would seek. So, yep, all of the above. So I skipped one. Let's go back to, okay, so here's another one. In experimental research, the researcher proposes a causal hypothesis. Is this true or false? So let's go. In experimental research, the researcher proposes a causal hypothesis. Is that true or is that false? Okay, starting to get some responses on that one. Okay. Good. Very good. Okay, let me go back. Let's see if we can find a slide that will help us with that one. Okay. Right here, what does this say? It says, in experiments, the researcher proposes a causal hypothesis, a speculation that one variable causes a change to another variable. Okay, so. And you guys have nailed it. Yep, you're right. It's true. So very, very good. Okay, good. So let's get back here. I have a couple of back-to-back videos that I wanted to share with you. So let's go ahead and
What is internal validity? Imagine the following experiment. A scientist was interested in understanding what factors were important for a long lifespan. They thought that drinking water was important, so they decided to get a bunch of people together in a room and gave them all a glass of water. The scientist told them to wait around in the room and that they'd come back in 80 years to check in on them. Sure enough, the research team checked back in after the 80 years and found the subjects had all died. On the basis of this, the researcher concluded water must be deadly. Of course, this conclusion isn't valid. In this experiment, the dependent variable, that is, the variable the experimenter was trying to measure, was lifespan length, and the independent variable, that is, the variable that was changed by the experimenter, was drinking a glass of water. One of the things needed for a conclusion to be valid is that the independent variable has to be the only thing that influences the dependent variable. In this lifespan experiment, there are, of course, many other factors besides the independent variable that influence the dependent variable, the least of which is locking people in a room and not feeding them for 80 years. This is what internal validity is all about. It's the extent to which you're able to say that no other variables apart from the independent variable cause the resultant change in the dependent variable. Factors other than the independent variable that may influence the outcome of the experiment are called confounding variables. So for the example, lack of food is a confounding variable in this lifespan study. Given variables other than the independent variable can influence the dependent variable in this lifespan study, this study has poor internal validity. The best way to ensure an experiment has good internal validity is to make sure there is a control group that gets treated the exact same way as the treatment group, just without getting the treatment. For example, in the lifespan study, the influence of confounding variables would be proved by inclusion of a control group that perhaps were also locked in the room for 80 years without food, but were not given a glass of water to drink at the start. They would presumably have suffered the same fate as the group that drank the water, revealing to the experimenter that something other than drinking water caused the death of the participants. Every time you assess a research study, you should make sure there is a control group that receives everything the experimental group gets, just without the experimental intervention. This will help you judge if the experiment has good internal validity or not.
okay. So then more, let's go to this one.
What is external validity? Imagine this scenario. Let's say a lady is sitting on a park bench when a stranger walks by and catches her interest. She would like to make a good impression on him next time she sees him, so she decides to do some research. She surveys the next group of people she comes across to get opinions on how you make someone fall in love with you. The group of people she next comes across are some young children playing in the park. She asks them, how do you make someone fall in love with you? The first child says, well, what works for me is yelling out that you love them at the top of your lungs. The second child says, oh, I like to wear my superhero suit. That gets my friend's attention. The final boy says, give them some food they like. Chips usually work for me. So the lady waits on the park bench at the same time the next day, and sure enough, her love interest walks by again. She summons the wisdom of her survey group and approaches the man. It turns out the results of her survey weren't generalizable to her situation of interest. And this is what external validity is about. It is the extent to which the results of a study are generalizable to other situations or groups. The love-struck lady's approach didn't go well as her survey was conducted on a sample that was very different from the target population. Good sampling is the key to a study having wide generalizability and good external validity. Here are some features of strong sampling in studies. Firstly, you should ensure a sample is representative of a wider population, or at least the population you want to generalize to. For example, let's say someone is conducting a phase 1 clinical trial to examine the safety of a new drug. If they only recruit male Caucasian university students from one hospital, their study will be less generalizable to the wider population than if they sampled from both genders across multiple ethnicities at multiple sites across the world. Secondly, a large enough group of individuals should be sampled to impart adequate statistical power. Thirdly, any exclusion criteria used in a study should relate to the question of interest. If the exclusion criteria are too strict, external validity will decrease.
Okay. All right. Any questions about those two videos before we get into the slides? Internal and external validity. Do we have any more comments in the chat? Nope. So in the first video, we're talking about the giving a glass of water to the people and then locking them into a room for 80 years. What is your understanding about that that example of internal validity? And anyone speak up and okay, I'll let you think about that. We'll go into this next slide here. Okay, so even when an experiment is the ideal research design, is not without problems. Okay, there's always a question about whether the results are true. That's something to think about. Although there are several different types of validity, whether a measure accomplishes what it claims, we're only focused on the two, and then that's what the videos talked about. Internal validity. Do the conclusions we draw about a demonstrated experiment relationship truly imply cause? And external, does an observed causal relationship generalize across persons, settings, and times? So each type of validity has specific threats we need to guard against. Okay, so and any questions about that? Internal validity and external validity as defined here. Okay. Okay, internal validity. Among the many threats to internal validity, we consider the following 7. Okay, history, maturation, testing, instrumentation, selection, regression towards the mean, experimental mortality. So, okay, so history. So during the time that an experiment is taking place, some events outside the company's control may occur that confuse the relationship being studied. So that was a very good, that was demonstrated in that video, right? That was a cute little example that they gave there. So a major corporation may experience a strike. A news story about companies with financial problems might appear in social media. A union meeting at which this topic is discussed might be held, or another occurrence could distort the effects of the company's education test. Okay, so maturation. Changes also may occur within the participant that are a function of the passage of time and are not specific to any particular event. So that's important, right? These are of special concern when the experiment covers a long period of long time period. So this longitudinal experiments that we talked about in earlier lectures, but they may also be factors in tests that are as short as an hour or two. So that's interesting, right? So a participant can become hungry, bored, or tired in a short time, and this condition can affect response results, and that's very true, right? I mean, especially let's say you kept them waiting, past their lunch hour, and you're testing for a new food product. Well, in some cases, when you're hungry enough, you'll eat anything, right? And their results are skewed a little bit because that person is just trying to satisfy of this hunger, and so they're more apt to favor the thing that provides this nourishment and a relief from the hunger. So that could be how some products can be tested in that type of environment. And then it says, in our experiment, a participant could begin a course in finance or accounting at the local university. Between then we didn't get into the codes that they use here, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But just know that time can affect long periods of time, even short periods of time, given the specific context, can have an effect on the outcome of an experiment. So, and then testing. The process of being measured can affect the scores of a second measurement. So the mere experience of taking the first test can have a learning effect that influences the results of the second test. So in our experiment, the act of testing financial knowledge can actually increase employees' sensitivity to such information, especially those answers they did not know. So that's very important, right? We can influence it by just providing more information. And so the second time, you're measuring, they're more informed or better informed than they were before. So the results are going to be different there too. So that's something to consider. Okay, so then instrumentation. So this threat to internal validity results from changes between observations in either the measuring instrument or the observer. So let's say you have a team of researchers and you have a different observer that comes in and their perspective is different, or they're doing things slightly differently than the previous observer or tester. So using different questions at each measurement is an obvious source of potential trouble, but using different observers or interviewers also threatens validity. Okay, so there can even be an instrumentation problem if the same observer is used for all instruments. So that's interesting. Observer experience, boredom, fatigue, and anticipation of results. It can all distort the results of separate observations, as we would likely measure financial knowledge with a survey or interview. That if we change either the method or the instrument, we threaten their experiment's internal validity. So I think that's pretty straightforward, right? I think that seems to be pretty straightforward, unless you have some questions. Anyone have any questions about that? Let's see, we have someone that no here. Some of that is something in the chat. Internal validity focuses on the internal consistency and validity of the research study itself, ensuring that the observed effects are attributable to the manipulated variables. External validity, on the other hand, pertains to the extent to which the study's findings can be generalized or applied to other population settings or conditions outside the specific study context. Thank you very much, Samia. That's excellent.
Sure, Professor. I think it's a little complicated or like little difficult subject. So I think trying to simplifying, I mean, for my own understanding as well, that when it comes to internal validity, it's like within that particular group. And if we are trying to research anything outside of that group, that comes into the category of external validity.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. These, you know, don't get me wrong. I understand that these are complex, you know, concepts. So I'm not expecting you to know them, you know, just instantly. That's where I believe in iteration, which means to repetitively teach a concept. That's why I use the polls. That's why, you know, we review what you're reading, and then the feedback that you're getting from your classmates, like, you know, Samia, Elena, Mohammed Hussein, Mohammed Yusuf, and Winnie, you know, wanting to review some of the instructions on the assignment. That's very, very, you know, helpful and in knowledge retention. So, okay, so that's so these go back to some of the learning theories, such as cognitive load and minimalization or minimal concepts of knowledge retention and learning. So where you do these little chunks, and then we do iteration to reinforce that learning. So so anyway, that's my my science hat. I'll leave that for now. But so selection, an important threat to internal validity is the assignment of participants to experimental and control groups. We talked about that. The videos also talked about that. Participants are randomly assigned to experimental and control groups. This selection problem can be largely overcome. So that's, you know, I think we're starting to understand why it's important to randomly, you know, assign participants. So again, and then aggression towards the mean. This factor operates especially when groups have been selected by their extreme scores. Suppose we measure the output of all workers in a department for a few days before an experiment, and then conduct an experiment with only those workers whose productivity scores are in the top 25% and the bottom 25%. No matter what is done, you know, between the variables, there is a strong tendency for the average of the high scores and for the low scores to increase. This tendency results from imperfect measurement that, in effect, records some persons abnormally high and abnormally low. And so this happens a lot when people are not careful. And sometimes people will skew research in favor of an outcome that they want. So this is where we get back to the integrity and you know, and the moral implications of research studies. So okay, and then external validity. Okay, internal validity factors cause confusion about whether an experiment, treatment X, or extraneous factors are the source of observation differences in the dependent variable. In contrast, external validity is concerned with the interaction of the experimental treatment with other factors and the resulting impact of the ability to generalize going back to Samia's excellent example, and across times, settings, or persons. Among the major threats to external validity are the following interactive possibilities: reactivity of testing on X, interaction of selection in X, and other reactive factors. Now, I think that cute little video did a pretty good job of that. And then reactivity on testing on X. So the reactive effects refers to sensitizing participants via a pretest so that they respond to the experiment stimulus in a different way. So you have to be careful with that, right? Beforehand measurement of a participant's knowledge about the ecology programs of a company will often sensitize the participant to various experimental communication efforts that might be made about the company. This beforehand, so they this is why they try to avoid juries in trials who have explicit knowledge about a case, right, or the defendant or the offender. So and then this before measurement that can be particularly significant in experiments where the for is a change in attitude. So the independent variable. Sorry, the IV is an independent variable. My brain wanted to see it as a Roman numeral, but that IV is an independent variable. Is a change in attitude. You'll see you'll see DUV and EV, and sometimes you'll see CV for covariance. Okay, so interaction of selection in X, the target population from which one selects participants or cases may not be the same as the population to which one wishes to generalize results. Okay. So in the example that they give here, suppose you use a selected group of workers in one plant for a test of the piecework incentive system. The question may remain as to whether you can extrapolate those results to all production workers within the firm, or consider a study in which you ask a cross-section of population to participate in an experiment, but a substantial number refuse to do it. If you conduct your experiment only with those who agree to participate, self-selection, can the results be generalized to the study, to the total population? So again, that brings me back to those opinion surveys where you're going to get some interesting results based on sometimes based on just relationships that individuals have with their managers. So okay, all right, and then external validity continued. Other reactive factors, experimental settings may have a biasing effect on a participant's response to X. An artificial setting can obviously produce results that are not representative of larger populations. So this is something that very important to remember and to understand. And then problems of external validity may not be as easily alleviated with careful design selection. So even if you're trying to avoid it, there might still be something that could affect it. So external validity is largely a matter of generalization, which is in a logical sense, is an inductive process of extrapolating beyond the data collected. So in generalizing, we estimate the factors that can be ignored and that will interact with the experimental variable. Assume that the closer two events are in time, space, and measurement, the more likely they are to follow the same laws. So and that's where we do a generalization and we extrapolate based on that. And as a rule of thumb in experimental design choices, we first seek internal validity. Okay, so that's That's an important thing to remember. Researchers then try to secure as much external validity as is compatible with the internal validity requirements by making experimental conditions as similar as possible to conditions under which the results will apply. So that's important, right? It's not one or the other, but you're going to use both internal validity and external validity in experimental research. Okay, so let's see where we are here. Okay, so for you. Okay.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Scientific Processes series in our Research Methods module. In the past 2 videos, we got to grips with how you go about planning the nitty-gritty details of your perfect experiment, including things like figuring out your aims, hypotheses, variables, sampling methods, and pilot studies. Now, we're looking at the bigger picture, experimental designs. Experimental designs are the plans for how the participants are split up into experimental groups. We're going to run through 3 experiment blueprints. First, a repeated measures design. Second, an independent group design. And finally, a matched pairs design. For each, we'll make sure that we have an exam-worthy description and evaluation. So let's get into it. First up, the repeated measures design. For this experiment, you have one group of participants who take part in both the control and experimental tasks. If you were looking at the effect of Red Bull on running speed, the participants would take part in the control condition, where they run after downing a pint of water, and then they take part in the experimental condition, where they run again after a whole can of Red Bull. So here, you're testing the same participant against themselves and comparing the result to see if the dependent variable, the Red Bull, had an effect on the independent variable, their running speed. There are pros and cons to running your experiment this way, so let's look at our evaluation. What's the good stuff? Well, the repeated measures design needs less participants to get the same amount of data as our other 2 designs, which saves the experimenters time, money, and their sanity. There's also control of participant variables. We'll come across these in a bit more detail when we come onto our next experimental design, but basically, because you're comparing 2 scores which come from the same participant, there shouldn't be any differences like age, height, or weight, which could have affected the difference between them. But this leads us on to our negative evaluation points. There can be order effects. If your first participant ran more quickly when they had Red Bull compared to when they didn't, this could just be because you'd completely worn them out running laps the first time. Because the same participant does both tasks, it might be that their performance in the second condition was influenced by things like boredom, tiredness, or frustration, and that this is what drove the difference in performance between the 2 tasks. On top of this, there might be a bigger risk of demand characteristics, where participants twig on to the aims of the experiment and so change their behavior to try and give you the right results. So for a repeated measures design, the same participants are used for the control and experimental conditions. This has advantages, as your sample can be smaller, which saves you time and money, and there's greater control of participant variables. But there are also disadvantages, including order effects and increased possibility of demand characteristics. Lovely. Next up, we have the independent group design, which uses different participants in each group, meaning each participant only does one condition or performs one task. If this time your experiment looked at the effect of TV on intelligence, you'd have one group of binge watchers who watch a full day of telly in the experimental condition, and then another group of bookworms who avoid TV in the control condition. At the end of the day, they all take an IQ test, and the binge watchers and bookworm scores are compared. So here, different participants are tested against each other, with different groups performing the control and experimental conditions. Again, we can't just leave our experimental design here. Let's have a look at the evaluation. First, the advantages. This time, we avoid order effects. Because participants only take part in one condition, they can't get tired or get better through practice. Next, we can also say that there's less likely to be demand characteristics. Because they only do one task, there's less of a chance that they'll catch on to the aim of the experiment. And what are the disadvantages? Now, we have the issue of participant variables, which we touched upon before. There might be differences between the 2 groups which affect the results. In our experiment here, if the group of binge watchers all have private tutorials at the weekend to help them with their schoolwork, and the bookworms in the control condition don't get any extra help, it might be that a difference in the dependent variable, which is the IQ score, can be explained not by a change in the independent variable, which is the TV, but because of this third variable, the ability to afford private tutors. Our second disadvantage is that you just simply need a bigger sample. You're going to need twice as many participants to collect the same amount of data, meaning you're likely to be out of pocket and much more tired by the end of the whole thing. Now, I'm sure some of you will have noticed that these evaluation points are the same as the ones we came across when we evaluated the repeated measures design, just in a bit of a different order. A super easy way that you can remember them for the exam is just to think that the advantages of one are the disadvantages of the other, and vice versa. So, for an independent group design, you have two groups of participants who take part in either the experimental or control condition. This is pretty good in that you can avoid order effects and demand characteristics, but there are also disadvantages, as you need a bigger sample and are going to struggle with the potential issue of participant variables. Okay, finally, there's the match pairs design. This is a variation of the independence group design in that we have two separate groups, but this time the groups are specifically picked so that they're matched on important characteristics, with the ideal match pairs scenario being to have split groups of identical twins. Let's say scientists are interested to see if consuming calcium makes you grow taller. One identical twin, Bill, takes a calcium supplement every day, aged 2, whilst his identical twin, Ben, does not. When they are 16 years old, Bill is 2 inches taller than Ben. Now, because Bill and Ben are genetic matches, researchers can draw even more specific conclusions about the effect of calcium on height. If we have a large group of twins like this, the findings of the matched pair study are going to be even stronger. Now, onto the evaluation. There are obvious advantages to a matched pairs design. Again, we don't have order effects because there are different people in each condition. But now, we've also gotten rid of the pesky issue of participant variables, because this time the differences between the groups should have been eliminated through the matching process, meaning that the only difference is the independent variable or the activity they perform in the experiment. But it's not all roses. We do still have disadvantages. You still need a big sample, with twice as many people compared to if you were using a repeated measure design. There are also issues with practicalities. It can be a pain to find a big group of participants who have near identical characteristics, and even if you do, on the day of the testing, there can still be differences in levels of motivation or tiredness, which could affect your result, so it's not perfect. So for a match pairs design, you have two groups of matched participants who take part in either the experimental or control condition. Matched participants have to have a number of the same factors, meaning identical twins are your best bet. You get the best of both worlds by avoiding order effects and participant variables, but there are still issues with sample size and with practicalities. And there we go. That's our introduction to experimental designs. Here are our key takeaway messages. We have three key experimental designs: repeated measures, independent groups, and matched pairs. For a repeated measures design, the same participants are used for the control and experimental conditions. This has advantages as your sample can be smaller and there's greater control of participant variables, but they can be order effects and demand characteristics. For an independent groups design, you have two groups of participants who take part in either the experimental or control condition. This is good. You can avoid order effects and demand characteristics, but you need a bigger sample and can have participant variables. And for a matched pairs design, you have two groups of matched participants who take part in either the experimental or control condition. This avoids order effects and participant variables, but there are still issues with sample size and with practicalities. Okay, so now we've got our ultimate experiment plan in place. Join me in the next video, where we'll be looking at a new research technique, observations. See you then.
Okay. All right, so I just wanted to make sure that we covered a little bit on that topic before we conclude it today. So good. Let me go back to our. Okay, so remember, we don't have any discussions this, for week 8. Chapter 8 doesn't have any write-in assignment, and then to remember to read the instructions. And references entries are also your in-text citations. Be sure to review that. I've decided that we'll just have a discussion prompt for chapter 9. We will not have a writing assignment for chapter 9. So I'm hoping that you'll use that time to go back and review or complete assignments that you might be missing. And then for chapter 10, we'll probably have the discussion and writing assignment, but only a discussion for this week. It'll be loaded in there for you to access it by midnight tomorrow night or sooner. And but no writing assignment. And be sure to reach out to me if you have any questions on that. So let me go back to very quickly. We will look at the instructions for that chapter 7 real quick here, because I promised that I would do that. So let me go back and okay. So let's go back to chapter 7, write an assignment real quickly here. And let's go back here. Okay, and now I'll share my screen here in a second since I get it set up. So, and I'll be very quick on this. So here, okay. So okay, so is everyone seeing that? I just want to be very quickly here when he asks me to go through this again. Okay, so the instructions are first, to become more familiar with the observation research process, review Exhibit 7.2 titled Observation and Research Process, found on page 155 of the textbook. Okay, so this is in the text, and I'm going ahead and put it in here, an image of it. So then down here it says, next, review observation research design on page 156, and in 600 to 800 words, using the table titled Factors Influencing Observation Research, identify each of the elements listed as they might be related to an observation research study on the safety of autonomous vehicles, known as self-driving vehicles. Okay, and then so these are the different factors: who, what, sampling, design, event sampling, and then I mean, this alone would constitute me not giving you any extra writing assignments, because this one was I realized was a little more complicated. Okay, and I'm not worried about deadlines if you get it done after the fact, and I left them open so that you can have access to them beyond the typical deadline date. Okay, so this will give you more time for completing this. And then of course this is to make sure you're using the APA style formatting. Okay. So Winnie, if you're on, does that clarify, Winnie? Is that good? Okay, I didn't see that she responded, but okay, good. Thank you, Samia. Okay, well, you can always reach out to me on WhatsApp, send me an email. You can even text me. I think I provided that number as well. I'm okay with that. So anyway, great participation today. Thank you. I love the discussions, participation. I'm so happy to see that you're responding to your classmates too. That's so important to do that. So anyway, have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Remember, no writing assignment for chapter 9, only the discussion. Okay? Take care, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
very
Professor.
Thank you, Professor. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day, Professor. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.